I love. We were just saying. I love that we are few and we are proud, kind of like podcast audiences today, but tomorrow, who knows? No, my name is Sarah Toporov. I work on podcast audience growth with Headliner. I'm based in Paris, and I've worked in podcasting for a good few years now. And do you guys work in podcasting? Yes, podcasting full time, folks. Yeah, awesome. You know that podcasting is pedagogy. Working in podcasting means constantly teaching other people about podcasting. Yes? Yeah, yes. Wake up. Come on. And no, I really love it because it's a medium that I really believe in. And it's a medium that I like working in because no matter who you are or how big your market is, at some point your competitors also have to be your collaborators, right? And I think measurement is probably the most important way in which you need to collaborate as an industry, as a market, because the stakes are bigger than podcasting itself. So consistent, coherent data and audience measurements is what we need to actually grow and properly monetize as an industry, because we need to communicate to media buyers, essentially. Because we're not competing with each other. I mean, we are competing with each other for audience and like share of ear, but for those ad budgets, we're competing with much more mature industries, with radio ad budgets. We're competing with display, with video, with out of home, TV, just all these traditional mature ad markets where if someone is planning a media strategy, podcasting is not at the top of the list if they can't understand what they're buying. So it's up to us to kind of bring that forward all together. And I'm really very, very pleased to be able to present the French case and a German case for how we're kind of tackling that as an industry. And this is such a cozy room that I would love to hear as well from the room about your different markets. I know I've talked to some folks from Portugal, some folks from Norway about how, their folks are collaborating on trying to get some consistent audience measurements out there. So I would love to hand it over to Katia Sanero from Louis Media, but also from lots of other places, which she will tell us about, and sort of the French example of how we're tackling this issue.
Hello. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Katia Sanero. I'm General Manager of Louis Media. Louis Media is one of the biggest media publisher native of the podcast industry. Louis Media has been created 7 years ago by Charlotte Pudlowski and Melissa Bounoua, and I joined them 5 years ago. We are doing podcasts like Emotion, or even a true story with Passage. And we actually launched last week our new podcast, which is I Have to Tell You. It's actually the first time we are launching a podcast simultaneously in 10 different languages. We used AI in a very ethical, journalistic way. It's actually something we are very proud of. We actually launched it both in podcast and with illustrative video as well. I put some flyers on the side if you're interested in having a look at it. And we are also producing studio. We actually produce podcasts for different medias, even radios, like Energy in France. And we actually share a common investor with the Elle French magazine, which is the CMI group. And I have, as you said, other hats. Because when I arrived 5 years ago in the French market, we had to structure the market with our competitors. That's a topic we share. I'm truly involved in the cooperation market. It's so important these days. So we created the union of independent podcast producers that gather together almost all of the independent podcasts publisher and producers in France. And one of the first topic we had to work on was the audience measurement. So I'm going to share with you how we selected ACPM for the independent market, and that's how we actually developed as a reference in France. But I'm also, so now I'm the president of that union, and I'm also the VP of Le GES, which is an association where we share data and thoughts on the market with different media. So the independent, but not just the independent, all the radios, like Radio France, all the private radios in France, but also television, everything for digital development. It's a very important gathering also. We try to develop the French market thanks to that. We have lots of legal topics. We have lots of like regulation topics these days, of course. And now, getting back to the ACPM and the audio measurement, I also rule the publisher committee of the ACPM. That's actually why I'm here today. So when we arrived, everybody was saying 5 years ago that the podcast was a new thing, but not really structured or not very professional. And the first thing we had to do when we were using metrics to say, look at the figures, it's increasing and increasing, and actually the engagement is so big, was the question of the advertiser and agency. Yes, but where are you talking from? Like, you're using a figures, but what figure is that? How is it calculated? And in France, we have two main associations working on that, Médiamétrie and ACPM. The ACPM is the Alliance for Press and Media Figures. It serves as an official auditor for media in France. It's actually an association ruled by publishers. So at first it was traditional media, and now it's digital and podcasts.
Yeah, I think most countries have the equivalent where it's like, it's a circulation audit bureau, right? So it's, over 100 years old, measuring how many newspapers were sold.
Yeah, the
Historically.
specificity of ACPM is that they ensure the transparency and reliability of the figure used. So we actually look at both measurement, but the ACPM was actually based on the IAB2 rules. It was internationally positive, and the figures measured was actually real, tangible figures because they gather numbers from your host server, and then they filter it. They filter it with 1 minute minimum of listening. They use the IAB Tech Lab also to improve the measurement. So it was really reliable and transparent for everyone. So every month they publish the main datas of every publisher that subscribe to the ACPM. Now they have almost 400 podcasts, and almost all the independent, but also traditional media like Energy Radio and independent radio as well. Others are still on the Médiamétrie, but Médiamétrie announced a few months ago that they were going to change their way of measure their listenings as well. They used to use watermarking, and now they are going to use ACPM data. So in a few months, next summer, we will be able to add figures together to actually have an overview of the whole French market. And it was actually something really demanded by the French market. We created with the government and ARCOM an observatory for podcasts when everyone involved in podcast industry in France are trying to help create new studies to measure the business and the audience. And actually, when they discovered that half the market was using datas and the other datas that were not calculated in the same way, they were like, how is that even possible? So starting next summer, we will be able to do that.
No, that's really exciting because all of the radio traditionally was on Médiamétrie in France, and it was interesting at the beginning because it kind of created this double market, which kind of maybe I think was it helpful to podcasters at the beginning because the numbers that radio were getting were so astronomically larger than podcasting that was it maybe helpful to kind of be in your own sort of like incubator to be able to share like I don't know, engagement in a different way, kind of away from competing with the big dogs?
Actually, we chose the ACPM because it was a measure that respects the strengths of the podcast industry, which means like the 1 minute minimum of listenings is actually something very relevant when you compare to podcast to radio. So it was a very strong argument that Médiamétrie didn't have. And we actually selected ACPM to communicate on the market saying, podcast is a very specific media where you have a huge engagement with very long duration listenings, and actually the two different board was actually saying that exactly. When you have like a top with 40 minutes long podcast with 1 million listening per month, but it's during 40 minutes, and the other one with only like 4 minutes podcast and it's like 10 millions. Of course, you're not selling the same thing. You're not selling the same engagement. So we used that to communicate to agencies and advertisers saying, podcast is a specific market. But 5 years later, the main part of the market knows that. I've tested podcast and they're coming back to podcast. So now, of course, we still need to educate some of them, but the majority knows the specificities. So now the fact that we are gathering everyone in the same figures is also important because the audio ads market is growing very fast, and we all need to take a little bit on it and that.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting two-step process, and hopefully the ads will be better quality. I mean, just speaking as a listener too, because I think we were having this conversation. If anyone was at the podcast summit, it's like stop shouting at us, and like instead of just putting radio ads on podcasts, maybe we should just make all ads sound like podcast ads a little bit more. I'm sure there's a happy medium. Anyways.
They don't do the same thing. Like, it's another topic for another panel, but
yeah.
I really think that they are complementary. Like, you need a mix of everything because the audio ads is more aiming at transformation, and the sponsoring is a very strong branding tool.
Yeah, no, I'm curious what this new change is going to mean for kind of campaign planning and if it's gonna get more homogenized or if it's gonna get more nuanced. So the time will tell. I would love to throw it over to Max Frank from Podius to hear about how the Germans are collaborating on audience measurement. And yeah, please tell us, enlighten us.
I just put this here. Yeah, hello everybody. I prepared a few slides to guide you through our story. Talking about Podius, first, just to introduce myself, I'm a managing director for Axel Springer Audio, so a traditional news publisher, where we also are an investor into WakeWord. And WakeWord is a production studio. They produce shows for platforms, for classic corporate clients, corporate podcasts. And about 5 years ago, we felt at WakeWord that we are lacking data in podcasts. And our view was this is a digital medium, however, it's very data thin. So we are a house of creativity, a house of content, but we'd like to back up our gut feeling with a bit of data. So we started crawling different websites, or we created Excel sheets with charts positions of different podcasts, and out of that emerged what is today Podius, which is a podcast analytics and media planning tool. And in total, we have a database of 4 million podcasts worldwide, and we collect all kinds of data there. So here you can, for example, see the Spotify followers for each podcast. We also collect all the ratings worldwide from Apple and Spotify. We work a lot with ratings also as a proxy for listener engagement and to get further insights on how people like a show or interact with it. But we also do internal scores, and you have all the Apple and Spotify charts worldwide, each category already historized for 3 years. And what is not available worldwide, but only in German or for German-speaking podcasts so far, is the reach. So for every German podcast, we can give you the reach per episode or the reach per month. And we do this with a combination of let's say, primary data and estimates. So we are partnering up with publishers and sales houses that provide us with their first-party data. So, for example, their reach, but also socio-demographic information. And we have this for a few thousand shows. And for the remainder, we make an estimate. And maybe quite a bit simplified, if you take the genre history in Germany, and we know for the chart number 3 and the chart number 5, we know we have the real data. Then we can triangulate also with the historic data we have. We make an estimate for the 4th position, and this is for well-established shows. It's like plus minus 10% off maybe. So it's quite accurate. It's difficult for new shows or for smaller shows, but overall it's okay. And using all this data, public data, and also primary data, we can build a lot of features on top of that can be used to better understand what's going on in the podcast market, charts, trends, what kind of shows are popping up, what's the distribution on various genres. And I'd like to share one example with you how publishers can work with that. So this is Publisher Welt, so traditional news publisher, and about 2 years ago they felt we need a science and knowledge podcast because it's one of our editorial focuses. So they went to Podius to dive a bit deeper into this category, and they learned that science and knowledge in Germany, it's quite big. So I think the top shows had at least 100,000 plays per episode. So that showed them, okay, there is relevance there, people like that. But they also learned that most of the shows, they come out rather infrequently, so maybe once a month or every other week. It's usually 2 older guys talking for 90 minutes about one topic. And they used this information to create kind of an antidote. And they said, okay, we create AHA, Alltagswissen, which translates to everyday knowledge, which is each episode is only 10 minutes long. It's a young female host talking to an expert. And we publish this, I think in the start, 3 times a week. And this has been one of the greatest successes right from the start, and it's still one of the best performing podcasts in science and knowledge in Germany. That's the publisher side. The other side we're covering with Podius, and we already touched on that, is advertising. So in Germany, we have the situation that probably 90% of all the monetizable inventory, or of all the podcast inventory, is not monetized yet. A large part of that is not monetizable. For example, the public service broadcasters in Germany are not allowed to monetize via ads. But we ask ourselves, how come that podcasts are so successful with listeners? It's such an attractive advertising medium with high CPMs, and we get feedback from listeners that they even love the advertising, they appreciate it. And how come that the market is so underdeveloped? So by the time it was, I think the monetization per listener hour of radio compared to podcasts was like 10x the size. And what we figured was the beauty of podcasting is that it has such low barriers of entry. On the other hand, that means that it's a very fragmented market. And
Sorry, when you say 90%
Yes.
is not monetized, is that 90% of individual shows?
Of shows.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually it's even higher. It's like 93-ish% of shows.
Okay. But not audience and not like ad fill.
No.
Okay.
So if you take well-established shows that are monetized with ads, some of them are maybe at 70% fill rate, which is pretty much sold out. I think overall the shows that are monetized with ads,
70% is sold out.
I think so. Yeah.
Do you agree?
In France, the top 20 of the ACPM is full, all the time, full of ads. And in November, December, you have to wake up very early to buy advertising on this podcast. But you have
Throughout the year.
the rest of the that is empty.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah. So,
Please.
of course, there are always times where you get close to 100%, but I think from a portfolio perspective, if I'm at 70% fill rate, I'm quite happy. So, however, with a majority of shows that are monetized, I think they still are more like 20 to 30% fill rate. And so yes, the problem we felt was fragmentation. So if you are a media agency, a media buyer, and you get a client briefing, a request for podcast advertising, where do you start? Of course, you could go to the usual shows that you know, the big ones, and that's what already happening. They're performing very well. But what is with all the rest? And so how do you plan that? And of course, you could go to a podcatcher and look this up, and that's what agencies did. And however, it's incredible. It's a lot of work. So it easily takes them 1 or 2 days just for the research and planning process. And from an agency point of view, that's not profitable. So they think in sorry, very business term, channel profitability. So when they get a request for audio, they're way more inclined to just go for radio because it's so easy, it's well established. And so that's why we built this part of the solution in Podius together with Group M, so a media agency, and we built it really according to their needs. And on top of all the data I already mentioned to you, we teamed up with several ad sellers, and they provide additional information. So for their shows, they provide briefing sheets, they provide socio-demographic information, they provide the pricing, the ad products that are available. And so this is just a screenshot from our media planning tool. So as a media agency, going back here, you could just scroll through the charts or use our search to filter your way through the shows you're looking for example, with specific keywords or specific genres to have your set of shows, and then you build your campaign in the campaign builder, and you say these are my goals, this is my budget, the reach, the ad slots I'm looking for, and the ad types, and from that you can create your campaign. Export it as a media plan. So we are not a buying tool; we're just a planning tool. And so I mean, we are still early. We launched this in beta in fall 2022, 2023. Our first year, we had a total planning volume of 10 million euros. Last year of 20 million euros, which is roughly 25% of the German market. So
do you know if
yeah.
those plans were then purchased?
No, we don't know. We don't know whether this translates into actual purchases. We do know, however, we work with the leading media agencies. We work with Group M, Omnicom, Havas, Dentsu, Service Plan. Some of them require ad sellers already in Germany to be on Podius in order to be considered for advertising planning, because it takes so much effort away from them. And yes, we don't know how many of that translates to actual bookings, but it's also a reason. There's a reason why all these ad sellers are working with us. So I mean, very proud to have included Wondery here last week, and can assure you, Acast or the likes of Wondery, they do a very deep due diligence before they go onto such a platform. And but still, there's a lot of work to do, and something we are now looking into, especially in terms of measurement, because that's a real pain for the industry, in my view, is everything around campaign reporting. And so if I talk to media buyers today, like what's holding us back from quadrupling the podcast revenue in Germany from where it is today, they say we need to professionalize this medium even further. We need to standardize. We need to agree on KPIs, and campaign reporting is one of the next steps to really do there.
And so Axel Springer, obviously a legacy media org, and so you are collaborating with radio stations as well. Like radio stations are offering their data to Podius.
We do work with radio stations, however, only for their podcast inventory. So there was also one learning also for the publisher analytics side. I mean, we work with big publishers and they have very sophisticated analytics system. However, podcasting is very, very different. And so no, it's not radio, it's podcast only.
Right, but the radio groups are buying in, as it were, to this
Yes.
to the solution as well.
Everybody who is doing podcasts could be eligible for that. Yeah.
And I say buying in because this is you can't get the dashboards you just showed us and all those insights. You need to pay to see them, right?
Exactly, it's a subscription model. So each party pays for us. We're not taking a cut out of the ads. So there's no fee for that, but our business model is subscription. Yes.
Okay, and how does that contrast with what you're building with ACPM?
We need them both. Actually, I really think that kind of tool is going to bring so much like clarity and new data to the market. It's so useful, especially for me as a publisher, the first part, and for the agency, as you said, the second part. It's really different. ACPM bring transparency and confidence, because I can't lie to the advertiser about the figures. And actually now it created so much confidence in our relationships with agency and advertiser. They know, as you said, on the reporting of a campaign, that everything we use as a data is true figures, and we know how we calculate it. So after a year or two of communication about the specificities, it actually accelerates the number of campaigns we have. actually the agency you talked about are the agency also in front that invest more in podcasts, in native podcast and replay podcasts. So I really think it's a positive dynamic. The more data and after the more transparent data you have, the more you can develop the market. So it's complementary. You need them both, and the transparency is one first step. And after you need more tools like that. But of course, the second question is on the figures you have on Podius. Where is the figures coming from, and are they all gathered in the same way? And can you add them together? So it's of course a relevant question.
Agree with everything you said, and I think so. So in Germany, I mean, we love to have the ACPM data. In Germany, as a matter of fact, we are working with the ACMA MA Audio, which is the German equivalent, and we have their data included as well. And of course, they give a lot of credibility there, and agencies, they rely on these metrics. So for us, it's just further data points and to prove it. For the it's really this difference whether we get primary data or if it's an estimate. Usually, every podcast that's monetized on Podius gives us the original data, and that's usually where we get the log files from the podcast hosts, so it's also IAB 2.0 compliant.
But the problem is that when you want to ensure the figure you're using, it's a lot of work because, and it costs a lot to like. We pay as a publisher to be certified because the technical team that work on this verification, like they do an actual work to check if there is like variation, if there is like bots involved and things like that, and they correct the figures every month. But I mean, for now, we only have that certification on a small part of the figures available, and we are working as publisher to push them to have more and more figures technically verified. For now, for example, we don't have the figures from YouTube, of course, in the ACPM. That's a work for the years to come. We have duration of podcasts, but we don't have the average duration, the real listenings of every player. That's a thing for the years to come. But it costs a lot to add more and more things, and we are dependent on the host servers to get that, and we need to make all the hosts working together for that to be able to get certified figures. So it takes time. We don't have every figures certified. That's why we need like projection also. Projections are useful as long as you know that it's a project and not a real figures.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the download because the download is all we have had and all we is it all we will ever have?
No, it's not only downloads. On the ACPM, we use the term download because we are not legally, we don't have the legal right to use stream because it's not 100% streamed. So we use download because a little part of the stream are downloads. So to make it real sure, we use download. But since last year and since the changes on the iOS 5, it's such a small part. So the biggest part of the figures are streams. But as long as we have a little Apple downloads and other platform downloads, we need to be, we have to use legally the term downloads. It's actually, we did a lot of commission and talks about that, and we agreed that if we want to be transparent and trustworthy, we have to be sure to use the right word. So
I talk about progressive download a lot. But yeah, no, I think what you're saying, you know, podcasting is data thin, and it kind of always has been, and we can keep adding more metrics, but I think we've grown a lot with kind of just the download, right? So no, I'm excited for kind of everything. Like what's the most exciting tool, either from from what you're working on or kind of that you've seen outside that you want to that you're like, ooh, once we have that, we're going to unlock so much, so much ad budgets? I don't know.
A lot. I mean, when I see Podius, of course, like the first part of the platform is very useful because it gathers in the same place everything that we do hand by hand. So I said like, whoa, it's so fast. But I would say last week we launched our first program both on YouTube and a podcast, and my marketing manager after a week said, oh my god, there are so many datas available. If we had that on audio, it would be so useful. So I would say like apart and all sorry, the data that we have on social media and videos are of course very useful. But we have to work with distributors like Apple and Spotify to have that, and I'm not very positive on that for the moment.
I would love to hear from this cozy room that we have. What's going on in your countries? Does this resonate? Could you share some more case studies? I know we have a lot of different markets represented in the room. Can we get a microphone to this gentleman, please?
Hi, I'm Frans Retief. I'm from South Africa. So completely different market and representation, but a lot of what you're saying is what we're seeing as well. I'm very interested to know if you look at the percentage of downloads, your Pareto principle, what that is, because in South Africa we had about 12 million listeners on our platform last year, but that is radio streams, also radio to podcast, and then pure podcast, but we do have most of the largest podcasters. And we're seeing a lot of the same things in that your top podcasts are frequently sold out, they're very popular, but they also the top 10% of podcast generates more than 90% of the listens. And the comment that I wanted to make is if you look at measurement, it's about building trust and credibility and showing potential and value. And it's one of the tools. I've got a great example of a guy that doesn't really use it. He makes a podcast for farmers and they all buy John Deere tractors, a number every year. And there's a joke, how do you know a guy's got a John Deere tractor? If he's not wearing the t-shirt, he will tell you. So for him, he's got a small audience, 1,000 people, but he's got a very viable business from that. But most of the other people have to sell their audience and rely on the measurement. We also comply with IAB because it's crucial that people can trust your stats. And the other thing that really resonated with me, so firstly, certification is very expensive, we agree with that, but it's crucial to consolidate the market. We're fortunate in that we're a platform, so we have first-party data and we use that. And we've basically, we've had massive growth in our advertising market. We actually sell digital audio as the same thing. So it doesn't really matter if it's a radio listener or if it's a radio to podcast or podcast, unless, for example, you want to advertise to podcast listeners, then you focus on that. But that has really boosted the podcast market, and it's allowed us to put premium podcasts in with well-known brands and build their credibility. And one of the things that we really focus on is very, very strong analytics. And we'll have ad campaigns where the advertiser will have access to the live reports, and they will contact us and say, listen, we want to move budget from this set of channels to those. We're seeing, and they would push up click-through rates to, 5, 10, sometimes 15% on the right type of audience, or they'll be measuring how many people skip out of the ads and seeing, these set of ads are doing well there and these set of ads are doing well there. So, and the other thing I wanted to say, similarly with analytics, is for you as a podcast producer, it tells you where you're resonating. So I definitely agree, we need to standardize on ads. I think we need to build credibility in general, and in South Africa we started to take budget back from above the line. Radio is starting to get budget back from digital, so it's a very exciting space to be in at the moment.
That's funny that when we are able to maybe know about ad skipping. Maybe there's like more stats that we don't want at the beginning, but then it's ultimately going to build more transparency across the market. So
It's just on that, and getting back to projecting, we can only measure ad skipping in our own ecosystem. So if somebody's listening on iTunes or Spotify, we don't get that.
Yeah.
But, you know, radio has always had to do some projection, and it's very useful to get those measurements and know the difference, which is first party and which is projected.
And one thing you said about, certification has a cost. Is it recorded? No, it's not recorded. I can say something.
I think this is recorded.
Oh, okay.
Talk to her after.
How can I say that?
Diplomacy.
Yeah. Actually, 5 years ago, when the ACPM launched the podcast measurement, they actually discussed with all the media, and the radio said, we already have Mediametry, we don't want to pay for both. And actually, only the independent part of the sector was looking for a measurement, and we had to make a choice. And one of the big problems with the independent is that they don't have money to start with. So you have to convince them to get certified, but you also have to convince them to invest in a certification measure. And it was actually a big issue. And that's why, as a union, we went to see the ACPM and we told them, if you want us to do the job with our members, you need to do the job and invest in us. And it was actually a very fair deal, because they launched a specific price for the independent for the first 3 years. And we were able to convince them, like, at least try, and you will see how it will impact your sellings. And when the market saw that all the independents, the independent podcast and the independent publisher were on the ACPM, they say, whoa, why is the traditional media not on the ACPM? I mean, we are not the more powerful, but we are so many, and we are actually some of the trending podcasts. So it actually helped a lot that the ACPM was smart enough to make that deal with the union to start with. And maybe if the other would have, like, we could have tested them both, but it helps to start. I really believe in cooperation inside the market. We have to try the tools of our competitors. We have to exchange with our competitors. We have to talk about that business, what works, what doesn't. I mean, competition is very good, and it's what makes the market evolve.
What I love is that you were working towards consensus and long years and months and conversations, and then it was kind of in contrast with how Podius started, where you just started publishing numbers without, like, you know, just with your triangulating data, with your secret sauce, and you said, here are your numbers, and everyone was like, what the? Don't tell people my numbers. Could you talk a little bit, like, quick? We only have a couple more minutes. Sorry, but no, I liked how you you forced the conversation that way. No, a little bit.
It sounds so controversial how you put it. I mean, we want to understand the market, and we are very happy if you give us your numbers. We try to lower the barriers. And yes, in the beginning we had many conversations with publishers saying, like, hey, this is way too low, or this is way too high, or what the heck, where did you get my numbers from? And that's, to me, that's not the point here. Is the question is really how to develop the market, how to, and we believe a lot in more transparency. And it's interesting. I mean, if you see the ad sellers on there, on Podius, they are competitors, and still they are pushing us for even more transparency. The only thing where we are not transparent is their prices. That's due to legal reasons, and that's what they also don't want. But other than that, I think it helps all of us a lot.
Yeah, sometimes you need to force the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because in France you have some traditional publishers that don't go into measures until they are sure to be the first. Of course, And actually, I was like communicating a lot on this measure, but I'm not the first, and I'm not going to be the first because the positioning of my media is not to be the first, is to produce podcast for a typical sort of listeners. And I mean, I'm not the most mass market publisher there is, but even if I'm not the first, it helps me a lot to sell because you don't need to be the first to sell. You just have to know your data and know who you are speaking to. And actually, a lot of people didn't want to publish their figures because they keep saying to the market that they are the first. Okay, if you're the first, just be measured.
Yeah. What are you hiding?
Yeah.
It's really this chicken and egg thing, and with the ACMA, so the German measuring standard. I had a conversation with one large publisher in Germany, and he was one of the first ones, and he said, well, of course I'm participating because I'm coming out on top, and my board loves it. And once they were there, it created more pressure for others to follow. But yeah, still, it's I think overall, and especially if you come talking to larger corporations, there's not a tradition of really opening up and sharing your data, and that's maybe in the overall podcasting being more grassroots. I think there's more acceptance for that.
Yeah, great.
And I really think we're starting years of cooperation between European countries. We really need now to cooperate between tools like that, to compare measures, to compare the relationship we've all have with distribution platforms. And now we need to make the market involve in a European way. And not just as a national ways. And because also AI is arriving, so now we need to increase the borders and communicate. So that's also why, as a union, we need to talk to other association or union of professionals like that to see if we have the same issues and how we can make things different together.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great note to end on. And like, I wanted to bring this conversation to the Radio Days table to do exactly that, to promote more cross-border collaboration on these topics. And so I would encourage you to keep this conversation going for the rest of the day, for the rest of the year. And yeah, work towards more transparency and podcast audience measurement. Thank you both. Thank you all for getting up early and hanging out with us. Enjoy the rest of your Radio Days.